name is Adam Golov, Marketing and Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers, so please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. Next slide, please. DCL serves a very broad client base. Next slide, please. Spanning all industries. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Elliot Kimber of Contracts. Without further ado, welcome Elliot.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about what's new and different in DITA 1.3. Very exciting for me. We've been working on this for a very long time. So just a little bit about me. I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been doing HTML, XML, and related technologies for 30 years. Been doing a lot of stuff. I was a founding member of the DITA Technical Committee. I was a member of the XML Working Group and other stuff in the deep mist of time. I'm still continuing to be very active at the DITA 1.3 activity, of course. So what are we doing with DITA 1.3? So DITA 1.3 is the follow-on to DITA 1.2, which is the current published version of the DITA standard. As of about May of this year, we froze all the features. So since then, we've simply been working on getting everything together in the spec, making sure that the spec is complete and ready for public review, making sure we've got all of the technical details worked out, all the DTDs are correct, and everything is good to go. Right now, we're looking to try to get something approved middle of 2015. I'm not sure that that's a realistic date at this point. It's taken us longer to get the spec done and ready for public review than we wanted, but we're working on it as hard as we can. Implementation in the Open Toolkit is underway. Jarno Elvirta in particular has been working very hard on the 2.0 version of the Open Toolkit, try to get as much 1.3 functionality in there as he can in advance of the specification being final. But there's a lot of stuff in there now, and there will be more in the not too distant future. So given that 1.3 is still under development and it hasn't actually been finalized, what can you do today? So one of the nice features of DITA is that DITA is designed for extensibility. Most of what's in DITA 1.3 is actually just new vocabulary implemented as normal DITA specializations. And you can start using those today if you need to. And I have clients and I have other colleagues that have clients who are using some of the new DITA 1.3 features right now. And they're using them as no different than using any other DITA specialization, whether it's one you created yourself or one that comes from the DITA Technical Committee. I would say, with very little fear of contradiction, the DITA 1.3 spec, as it currently stands today, is very stable. It's highly unlikely that there's going to be any significant change between now and the final spec. Everything we're doing right now is just making sure that our normative language is 100% correct and accurate and clear, but we have certainly no intention of making any functional changes to anything that's currently defined in DITA 1.3. So that means that, barring some bug that nobody's uncovered yet, using the new DITA 1.3 vocabulary is pretty safe. And I'll talk more about some of the new stuff that's coming and why it might be interesting to you. Like I said, a lot of the new vocabulary, the support's already been built into the current 2.0 toolkit. Hasn't been formally released yet, but I mean, if you went and looked at the code, you'd see that's there. I've done some work to implement some of the new vocabulary, mostly because I designed a lot of it, and I'll be doing more of that in the coming months and they're contributing that back to the Open Toolkit. So you should see, certainly by the end of the year, early next year, pretty much all the vocabulary that's new in 1.3 that needs support, because not all of it actually needs to have any special processing. Anything that needs new support should have at least some minimal support in the 2.0 toolkit. I'm also trying to implement support for use with the older toolkits as well, where that's possible, and for the most part it is. One of the interesting things about the DITA 1.3, there's some new architectural features, which we'll get to a bit later. All of those features can be implemented as preprocessors that then produce DITA documents that are just normal DITA 1.2 documents. So for example, if you have an existing 1.2 tool chain, you could continue to use that tool chain just by adding some preprocessing to handle the DITA 1.3 stuff. So you don't necessarily have to have all of your existing tools upgraded to understand the new 1.3 architecture just to take advantage of it. Of course, you'd like to have that, but it's not necessarily a requirement. And I know I'll be doing some more work around implementing that pre-processing myself. Yarno is going to be doing some work on that in Open Toolkit. I'm sure other vendors and tool suppliers will be as well. All right, another important reminder, anytime we talk about new versions of DITA, we have to be very clear that the DITA promise is that new versions within the same, new releases within the same major version of the DITA standard are always backwards compatible. So that means that any DITA 1.1, 1.0, 1.2 documents that you have today will continue to be valid 1.3 documents without modification. All right, so DITA 1.3 adds new stuff you can use. It doesn't require anything new that's not in documents you already have, and it doesn't break any documents. It doesn't break anything in documents you already have. Right? The behavior of your documents should be the same. So if you, like for example, let's say you're processing your documents with the current Open Toolkit, 2.0 toolkit comes out, you pull it down, all the DTDs are 1.3 DTDs instead of 1.2 DTDs. Your documents, you should not notice any change when you're using that with your existing documents. Everything should just work as it did, and if it didn't, then that means somebody, probably me, made a mistake. And we should fix it. But no, everything should just work fine. I mean, this is actually a challenge for us as standards writers because sometimes there's things we'd like to fix that we realize were wrong in older versions, but we can't fix them, or we can't fix them as completely as we'd like because that would break backwards compatibility. So we take this very seriously on the TC. You can be sure of that. All right. So first I wanted to offer just a quick overview of the new features, and then I'll go into some of these new features in more detail. And of course, I encourage any questions you might have. We'll get to those at the end of the main presentation. So there's lots of new vocabulary, and you can blame me or thank me for that as you choose. I was responsible for the majority of new proposals for DITA 1.3. So not necessarily the most important proposals, but the largest number of proposals. So we have MathML and SVG integration. So DITA is now up to date with those very important content standards that aligns DITA with both HTML5 and the new EPUB 3 specifications. And generally it makes something that a lot of people have always needed to do and people have done in various ways in the past, just builds it right into the standard. So that's very exciting. Troubleshooting, there's new markup support for having troubleshooting content in your stuff. There's a new troubleshooting topic type. There's a new note type, and there's new elements for use within task. So I know a lot of people who are doing, maintenance analysis, repair kind of documentation need that troubleshooting stuff. If you're doing online help, there's a new UX window display element that allows you to define the details of the actual windows that your help should be displayed in, and some new attributes on revision ID to better align DITA content with the way that modern help systems work. And so that's going to be, I think, very important for people using DITA for online help delivery. Release management metadata, so if you need to maintain formal lists of changes or otherwise capture documentation of the changes made to topics or maps in them, the markup is there for that now. In fact, the DITA Adoption Technical Committee will be releasing a nice little report on how to use the release management metadata, what it does and what you might use it for. We'll be releasing that here pretty soon, so that's very interesting. Learning and training enhancements. If you do any educational content where you have test questions or interactions, if you're doing whether it's printed tests or online interactive assessments, the original learning and training domain, which provided all the question and answer markup, had some design issues. We have corrected those in DITA 1.3. So, for example, you can have any kind of block elements in your question, in your question statements or your answers, your feedback. That's very nice. Delivery target conditional attribute, that lets you have a built-in condition that's specifically intended to let you say this content is for PDF, this content is for HTML, or whatever it might be. We added line through and overline elements to the highlight domain. Kind of fills that in. Those were driven partly by requirements from the semiconductor domain. New div base element type. It just sort of takes the idea of body div and section div, which were new in DITA 1.2, generalizes them even more, gives you a more flexible basis for doing specializations and so forth. Elements for tagging XML markup. It's sort of odd that a standard that was an XML standard didn't itself have any markup for talking about markup. So we corrected that in DITA 1.3. There's now tags for tagging tag names and attribute names and so forth, and then we've used that in the latest version of the DITA specification itself, which once the initial markup was applied, makes a lot of things much nicer in the specification source itself. We can be very consistent in how we present our XML markup. New sort as element, so if you have a need to do arbitrary sorting of content, say in a glossary or within table columns or definition lists or whatever, there's now a general sort as element for you can control the sorting details, like specifying sort keys for Japanese or other Asian languages, that sort of thing. We've added table attributes for layout control and accessibility to really bring DITA tables in line with existing HTML standards and requirements for accessibility, and also just added the ability to do rotation of tables and table cells, so that's something we've wanted for a long time. New cascade attribute for metadata propagation in maps, which if that's something you do, it's important. If you don't do that, then you probably never notice it. So that's the new vocabulary. Architectural enhancements. We tried, as the technical committee, we tried to limit, the amount of new and difficult to implement features that we added in DITA 1.3. DITA 1.2 was a pretty big jump from DITA 1.1 with the addition of keys. With 1.3, we knew that there were a couple of things that we had to add, and the first one was scoped keys, which allows you to have the same key referenced in different parts of a map and resolve to different things depending on where you are in the map. Now, this is a very important feature that wasn't in DITA 1.2, and without it, your ability to meet certain requirements was limited. Scope keys also enables cross-deliverable linking, which that's important for my clients who tend to be publishers. And there are people out there who need to do this and don't. Now you have a way of at least doing it at the authoring level, and we'll talk about that in a bit more. Another very important feature is branch filtering, and that allows you to have different filtering rules applied to different subparts of your map for a single processing output. It also provides the convenience of automatically copying map branches that have different conditions applied to them. And this is really important for reuse and being able to create publications that, for example, reflect different products or different languages within a single, a single publication processed as a unit. And again, we'll talk about that in a bit more. But these two features, scope keys and branch filtering, these are the big architectural enhancements in DITA 1.3. I think they're very, very important for DITA users, especially anybody doing, lots of reuse within their content, complicated technical documentation in particular. These are really essential features that that DITA had to have. At the same time, these features do present some implementation challenges. So if these are features that you need, and your tools today, if the tools you're using, if your vendors haven't already said, yes, this is our plan for implementing scope keys, this is our plan for implementing branch filtering, you should go talk to them now, because it's going to take some time for the engineers of tools, including the Open Toolkit, to get these features fully implemented. But I think these are really critically important features for those people who need them. Obviously, if you don't need these, then you just ignore that they're there and go on. A couple of other smaller architectural enhancements. This topic fragment identifier. This is a convenience feature that really should have always been in DITA but wasn't, which allows you to simply say, use a dot in a fragment identifier pointing to an element. So in DITA, if you want to refer to an element that's not a topic, you have to specify the topic ID / and then the ID of the element you want to get to. Well, if the element you want to get to is in the same topic as the element making the reference, it's sort of tedious to have to specify the topic ID. There's also some use cases around content reference where this becomes a problem. So the solution that we have here is being able to use a dot in place of the topic ID, and that dot means this topic. That is, the topic that contains the reference is where you'll find the ID that you're pointing to. And then cross-deliverable links is the ability to author links, that is, particularly cross-references, that are explicitly links to locations in a different publication. It's something you couldn't do, well, there was no defined way to do that before DITA 1.3. So that's a potentially important feature for those people that need to create those publication-to-publication cross-references. There's a bunch of stuff I'm not even going to talk about today. Relax NG as the master vocabulary grammar format. That's really important to me. This was my proposal. I've done a lot of work to implement it, but I'm not going to talk about it today. A lot of small but important enhancements to content models. We adjusted a lot of stuff, made things generally a little more accommodating than they were in the past. Some enhancements to how specialization works. We needed that for the troubleshooting domain, but it needed to be there in general. We're trying to improve the specification, make it cleaner, clearer, easier to understand, more effectively organized, smaller in terms of the actual space that it takes to publish it. The editors, Robert Anderson and Chris Eberlein, have put really a huge amount of work into that. And so we're hoping that will provide some benefit to the DITA community going forward. And then there's a whole lot of stuff that we thought about over the course of the 1.3 process that we didn't put in for whatever reason. I'm not going to talk about all the stuff we didn't do, which that could be a very long discussion as well. All right. So that's a very quick overview of what we're doing in DITA 1.3. Lots of new vocabulary, key new architectural features, scope keys, branch filtering, a couple of smaller improvements. So now I want to talk about scope keys. So to understand scope keys, you first have to understand DITA 1.2 keys. I know that not everybody is necessarily using keys today, not everybody understands keys. A really important feature of DITA 1.2. It allows you to do indirect addressing to topics. And in particular, within a map, you can define a key, chapter 1, and you can say, within this map, chapter 1 points to the topic file 123.data. Then you can refer those keys from your topic. So for example, I can have a cross-reference to the key chapter 1. In the context of the map I'm using, it's going to resolve to that 123.data file. In a different map, could resolve to a different file, right? That functionality, that ability to have that indirection through these map-defined keys is essential for reuse because it allows you to have a single topic be used in different maps and have a link out of that topic resolve to different topics in different maps as appropriate. So for example, you might have a generic task that says, see the installation procedure, where the installation procedure is going to be different in different maps that generic topic's used in. Right? You can't do that without some form of indirection, and keys is the way we solve that. So it's a very important feature of DITA 1.2. You can also use it just to get string values. That's the way a lot of people use it. Things like product names or whatever. You can also use that with keys. And again, because the keys are defined in maps, you can have different values, different string values for the same key name defined in different maps. So again, that's essential for reuse. But in DITA 1.2, there was a limitation in the key mechanism, which is that keys were global within a given publication, that is, with a given root map. So that meant that every reference to a key had to resolve to the same topic or the same text value. And the limitation there is that, for example, if you wanted to have a multi-product publication, right, or a multi-language publication, where what you really needed was to have, within the context of the part of the publication that's for product A, key X resolves to the product A version of the topic, and in the part of your publication that's about product B, the reference to key X resolves to the product B version of that topic. You just couldn't do it. In 1.2, there was just no way for that to work. And so that was a problem that we had to address in DITA 1.3. So in DITA 1.3, what we've added to the original key mechanism is scopes. And so what that allows you to do is have named scopes within maps. So for example, within your map, you have, say, two subtrees of your map, one for product A and one for product B. You can now actually say, this part of my map is scope product A, and this other part of my map is scope product B. Then within those scopes, unqualified key references resolve to the key as it's defined in that current scope. Qualified key references can refer to the scope, to the key in the context of its scope. So that allows you to have the same key resolve to different values, to different topics or different string values in different parts of the same root map. And that's really essential for being able to do reuse completely without having to do pre-processing or without limiting your ability to have, say, cross-references or references to replaceable string text. It worked. I mean, we haven't changed anything about the basic key mechanism. So it's still the case higher maps override keys defined in scopes. But what it allows is the same topic can be used in different scopes within the same map and have the same link as authored resolve to different targets in that same publication, right? So now you can have a publication that represents both product A and product B have a single key reference, key Y, resolve to two different product-specific topics in those two different parts of your larger publication. And if that's something you need to do, and this comes up a lot, especially in more complicated or more technical documents that have a broader subject scope that, whether it's multi-products or multi-languages or whatever it might be. If you have this requirement, then you need this feature very much. If you don't have this requirement, you can just ignore it and just pretend that, either you don't use keys at all, which I don't recommend, or you just use keys as they always were in 1.2, just think of them as global. You're not required to use key scopes, but if you need key scopes, they're there. The key scopes apply to conref, xref, topic ref. So any element that can make a key reference, which is quite a few now in DITA 1.2 and 1.3, the key scopes apply to all of them and they all work the same way, right? So for example, in the case of content reference, you can have a generic topic that has a conref via key that can get different, resolved to different values in different parts of the same map, which you could never do before. And before DITA 1.3, you had to do some very, very twisted and non-intuitive things to get around that problem for conref, for example. So this is a very, very important feature. Got some complexity to it. We're going to be doing a lot of work on the adoption side to help make sure that we've provided a lot of supporting conceptual information around key scopes. We'll be working very hard in the DITA Open Toolkit to implement key scopes and get them going. So these are some of the use cases, multi-product, multi-language publications. Or maybe you want to just combine separate publications into a single publication. You had something that was originally published as multiple volumes. Now you want to publish it as a single unified thing. So for example, maybe you had content that was published as individual books in the past. Now you want to combine it into a single website or a single ebook or something. You can do that easily now with keyscopes, where you couldn't do that in DITA 1.2. Certainly not without modifying the source itself in ways that would probably be challenging and painful. All right, cross-deliverable links. One of the things that keyscopes enables, or perhaps a better way to say it would be one of the things that keyscopes sort of makes clear in a way that wasn't necessarily clear in DITA 1.2, is that there are multiple sets of keys that are distinct from each other, right? So each keyscope is, you can think of it as a separate space of keys, and they're independent of each other. Well, if I have two root publications, it should be clear that each of those can have its own keys and they're separate from each other. And I'd like to be able to link from one publication to keys in another publication without having to make that entire publication set of keys part of my own publication. That would just make things too complicated. That would be insane, and we wouldn't want to do that. So what we can do now in DITA 1.3 is you can point to another map. You can say that it has a scope of peer. A scope is a feature that DITA's had for a long time. On links, you can say scope equals local, peer, external. The peer value was never really understood or clearly defined in the DITA spec. Local, very clear, just means this is part of my map. External is very clear. It means this is not part of my map. It's something else, like an external website or whatever. Peer was always very fuzzy. For DITA 1.3, for the specific case of pointing to a map, peer means this is another publication. And if I assign a keyscope to this reference to my map, to my peer reference to my map, I'm now able to refer to keys in that map using the scope prefix that I've assigned in my publication. What that gives you then is a way to unambiguously and clearly in your source author links that can then become cross-deliverable links. They don't have to be cross-deliverable links, right? If you brought those two publications together, you just change the way you're referencing the map from peer to local. It all just works because it's still just a keyscope. So it's sort of magical in that way. But the key is that it allows you to author cross-deliverable links and be clear as an author that that's what you mean, but at the same time you take advantage of all the features of keys so that link doesn't always have to be a cross-deliverable link. It just depends on how your maps are organized. So I think that's a very important feature of DITA when you have this need to have cross-deliverable links. Now the challenge is, so the interesting thing about this feature, it makes it very easy to author these links. The actual processing to make these links work in a particular output could be pretty intense. So it's there's two sides to this coin. One side, oh yeah, I can author these links that mean cross-deliverable links. Flip side is now I've got to update my processors to actually do something useful with these. That could be a challenge. I'll certainly be working on this in the context of the Open Toolkit. We know how to go about doing it. It's just the doing of it is going to take a little time, but it's there. Again, if this is a feature that you need, if this is a requirement that you have in your content, you should definitely be talking to your tool suppliers about this now, so that they can start thinking about it and plan for it, and decide how they're going to go about supporting it in whatever way is appropriate for that tool. If it's not something you need, then you just ignore it and don't have to worry about it at all. All right, the other big architectural enhancement in DITA 1.3, branch filtering. So in many ways, branch filtering is even more exciting than keyscopes. And by exciting, I mean if you're the kind of person who has really complicated documents and lots of conditional processing and you're doing lots of filtering, this is going to be a really important feature. If you don't do filtering and so forth, well then of course again you can ignore this. But this allows you to do something that you just couldn't do up till now in DITA, which is within a subpart of your map have different conditions apply. So again, let's say that I have content that's conditional for either product A or product B. And I use filtering to either filter out product A or filter out product B, depending on which version of the content I'm presenting. Before DITA 1.3, to do that, I had to publish a product A only version and then I had to publish a product B only version. I couldn't process a single publication that reflected both products A and B because filtering conditions through DITA 1.2 were global. Either it was all product A or it was all product B. I couldn't do anything other than that. With DITA 1.3, now we can say this subpart of my map applies to product A, this other subpart of my map applies to product B, but not product A. And therefore the same topics used in two different places in the same map can now be filtered differently for output. And that's really important. That makes a whole lot of things possible that were either difficult or impossible to do in the past. And again, this is entirely about supporting important reuse use cases. So in 1.3, what you can do is within a map, you can have topic ref elements that then contain references to DITA files. So it's the same DITA files you're used to with DITA from the beginning, but now instead of only being able to specify them as a parameter to your processor, now you can specify them, you can link to them from within the map itself on different topic refs. Right, and then the DITA val applies just to that branch of the map. Now here's a really interesting bit is within a single topic ref, you can have references to multiple DITA files. Right, so you might say, let's say that I've got some content that applies to 3 different operating systems. I've only got one set of topics, and each topic has, conditional bits if it's for Windows, if it's for OS X, if it's for Linux, whatever, right? The usual nightmare of conditional text that we have to deal with. But I only have to reference that set of topics once, and then I can have just multiple DITA files, one for Windows, one for OS X, one for Linux, and the processor will automatically make a copy of the branch, one copy for each different set of conditions, and then process it as though I had actually literally authored 3 different copies that all reference the same topics and only differed in the conditions that were applied. So I think that's a really important convenience feature. It's going to make managing complex documents with complex conditionality, complex filtering rules much, much easier. A part of this, of course, is if I'm going to make copies of these branches, I have to be able to control the names that I'm going to have, right? Because for example, I might need to have different actual source file names, or I might have to have different key names so that things are appropriately distinct in these different branches. Or I might want to have different key scope names in these different filtered branches, right? So now, I imagine some of you are like, your mind is sort of blown at this point because there's a whole lot of very complicated stuff to sort ahead. But those of you who can kind of follow along in your head, you're starting to see, or hopefully you're seeing, the potential both exciting and scary interaction between key scopes and branch filtering. So if you find that interaction interesting and your head hasn't exploded yet, that's what we're in for, and it'll be, if you're the person who understood that, you're going to be the person in your group who has to explain this to everybody else. And if your head has exploded, look for those people and help them explain it to you. Because this is a really important part of DITA 1.3, but it's also really complicated. I mean, we all realize that. So, we're going to be doing what we can to help the DITA community understand how this works and help tool implementers understand how they should be going about it. But from the standpoint of being able to do what you need with your content, these 2 features, branch filtering and key scopes, I think are really, really important. As far as I'm concerned, they pretty much complete the set of features that DITA needed to have to support all of the reuse use cases. I think that there are, certainly those that we've recognized. Right, so the obvious use case is the one I already described, which is having a multi-platform publication. Obviously multi-audience publications, multi-product publications, or some combination thereof, right? I mean, I've worked with clients that have, just insane numbers of conditions and, many different dimensions of conditionality all combining together, and it becomes a big challenge. Hopefully this will make the challenge easier to address. And actually, one more thing I want to say here, I didn't talk about, I didn't really prepare a slide for. We've also clarified a feature that was always in DITA 1.2, but hadn't really been highlighted, which is that you can use subject schemes, which allow you to have, for example, a hierarchy of controlled values. You can use subject schemes with your filtering, so that, for example, you can say, I have a general notion of an operating system, and under that, there's different instances. So like Windows is a good example, right? We have Windows, but then there's like 18 different versions of Windows. By using subject schemes with your DITA vals, you can say, for example, this applies to Windows, and therefore any value that's a subtype of Windows should be considered to be filtered in or filtered out, whatever it is, instead of having to enumerate all those values in all of your different DITA val stuff. So I didn't talk about that in detail, but just let you know that that's there, and that's also that's part of our attempt to make the management and the application of filtering both easier and more powerful. All right, so I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I think we're okay. I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for questions. Let's talk about some of the new vocabulary in a little more detail. I'll give you a minute just to let your brains cool down, and maybe you can formulate any questions you have about key scopes of branch filtering. Like I said, it's a lot to take in this sort of quick presentation, but I want you to know that those features are there. SVN integration lets you have inline SVG graphics. That is, you can put the SVGs right in your topic content. You can also link to SVG that's stored in a separate file, separate non-DITA file, pull that in. So that's very handy for SVG. We've needed that for a while. We finally had the opportunity to do that here in DITA 1.3. MathML integration, pretty much the same deal. You can have inline MathML elements in your topic content. You can link to math elements that are held in a non-DITA file. In addition, we've added a domain for identifying equations semantically, right? So you might have equations that may or may not be represented in MathML. You might have just images. You might have tech content. You might, there's any number of ways that you might represent the actual data of the equation. And in fact, you might even use all of those in the same document to support different deliverables or meet accessibility requirements or whatever it is. So in order to make a clear separation between MathML as a way of representing mathematics, more or less as an image, as distinct from a thing that is an equation semantically, and therefore you might want to number it, you might want to format it in certain ways. We also have the equation domain. And that's been designed with a lot of input from academic use of mathematics and the way that people use MathML and the general rules for rendering and using equations in content for example, for scientists and academics. You can control equation numbering, and you can have alternate forms of the equation. So maybe you have MathML, maybe you have an image, whatever you have, that's all there as well. So I can't claim that this is complete support for the use of math and DITA content, but we took it as far as we could in the DITA 1.3 time space. Troubleshooting support, we have a new topic type called troubleshooting, and that provides your basic problem cause solution structures. So if you have that kind of troubleshooting content, we now have a purpose-built markup for it. There's elements for use within tasks. So step troubleshooting and task troubleshooting, these allow you to clearly identify that part of a task that is the troubleshooting content, because you might want to highlight it in some way or otherwise make it easy for your users to find, how do I fix the problem I have at the moment, right? That's really what troubleshooting is all about. And then there's also a new value for the type attribute on note called trouble. So that just says, this is a troubleshooting note. Again, this design was driven by input from primarily the machine technical documentation industry. It reflects some relevant standards for how troubleshooting information and content is presented as well. UX window control. This gives you some features that you never have for online help. So within your maps, you can define essentially, the window specifications. I need a 400 by 600 window that I'm going to put this kind of help in, and I want a smaller window for this other kind of help, whatever it is. This allows you to have a little more control as an author of your map over the details of how the help's going to be presented. And this, again, is designed to reflect the way that modern help systems work. Within topics, the resource ID element, it's always been there, but it really wasn't optimized for help use. Now you can both refer to a window definition if you want to say, you know, for this resource, this, you know, for this topic that's associated with this, you know, this component of my software, show it in this window. And then we also have the app ID attribute lets you say, you know, maybe I'm delivering my help through different applications, or maybe this topic is associated. Make sure I get that right. Maybe this topic is associated, used by different applications presenting it as help. You could have different IDs on the same topic that reflect different, you know, for example, different software products that are going to be using this help. Not my area of focus, so hopefully I haven't gotten the details right there. Release management metadata. This allows you to essentially keep change histories to whatever level of detail you want in your maps and topics. So if you may have regulatory requirements, you may have you know, general business practice by which you need to capture details of how something has changed. That's, you know, not just simply doing a diff against the, you know, the last version of the source. Have features for things, you know, you can refer to issue tracker issues if you've got an issue tracker. Whatever it needs to do, the markup should be sufficient to really represent changes in any way you need to. And the design allows it to be extended using whatever metadata you want, normal specialization techniques. You can extend it beyond that. And then this could be used, for example, to auto-generate lists of changes or produce reports. Or one of the things we talked about on the adoption committee was, you know, a tool that could just generate a spreadsheet of all the changes and all the topics used in a map. Right? That would be pretty useful, not too hard to implement. So we'll see if we can get something like that going here before too long. Learning and training enhancements, new map types. Those are just sort of something we overlooked in DITA 1.2. New learning 2 domain for interactions. For like a lot of my clients do educational publishing, a lot of them use the question and answer stuff, really important for them, being able to have block elements in questions, answers, and feedbacks. Same semantics, same question types as in DITA 1.2, and it can be used in conjunction with the original learning domain. So if you have content today that uses the old question types, you can start using the new question types. You don't have to update all your documents if you don't want to. It'll all work together. But because of the backward compatibility requirements, we couldn't just go and change the existing design. We actually had to create a new domain for DITA 1.3, but that's there. Delivery target conditional attribute lets you have deliverable specific content. This is just a normal specialization of the props attribute. Nothing magical about it. It's just that we put it in the spec. A non-normative part of the spec, we have a sample subject scheme that defines a set of typical values. But of course, you can use whatever value you want. That subject scheme also happens to demonstrate having that hierarchy I talked about earlier of having a hierarchy of terms that you can then use for filtering in a more convenient way. And you can look at that when the spec comes out. Highlight domain enhancements, line through, overline. Really just completes the set of line-based highlighting, right? We had underline, now we have middle line and a line above. Just seemed necessary to have all three. XML markup for tagging. Not going to spend too much time on this, but if you do documentation that talks about XML markup, you will now have tags specifically for identifying tag names, attribute names, stuff like that. Div base element type. It's useful. We needed it for the learning 2 domain. If you do a lot of specialization, this could be interesting to you. It's probably only of really interest to real deep specialization fanatics like myself. It's nothing that authors would normally be expected or necessarily even allowed to use in normal authoring, but very important for some specialization use cases. All right, so let me summarize quickly here so we have some time for questions. So I think the message here is that DITA 1.3 in many ways was really focused on supporting reuse. All right, scope keys, branch filtering, satisfy most, if not all. I mean, of course, we can't claim to have satisfied all requirements. But I think most of the requirements that were not met in DITA 1.2 with the base keys feature. This topic fragment identifier makes links within conrefs work properly. That was always a problem before we had this. It's a subtle detail, but it's an important one if you have that requirement. Branch filtering makes multi-product, multi-language, multi-audience publications possible, right? It allows you to reuse things with much greater flexibility, scope, and do things that either were hard or impossible in a pretty easy way now. Cross-deliverable linking, flexibility in how you package, right? Now you can choose, do I package stuff as a single publication, multiple publications, is it one website for online delivery but multiple books for print? Now you can make those choices and hopefully have it work as it should. Vocabulary. So we wanted to integrate key standards, right? MathML, SVG, very important standards for content generally. We wanted to align with HTML5 and EPUB 3. Troubleshooting, release management, those are really important in the technical communications domain. Learning to, really important for educational publishers in particular, but anybody doing training where their content is sourced through DITA. UX enhancements, important for online help. Most of my clients are not doing online help, they're mostly publishers, but it's clear that the online help community wasn't really getting the kind of love it really needed to have gotten in the past, and so hopefully we've made up for that a little bit. So in short, DITA 1.3 fills in some important feature holes that were left in DITA 1.2. I mean, we knew that we were not doing everything that needed to be done in 1.2, but we had to get 1.2 out, right? Iterative improvement of vocabulary, no changes to existing semantics processing or rules, right? So we haven't changed anything fundamental about what DITA said. Well, I mean, we can't because backward compatibility wouldn't allow it. But we certainly didn't do it, certainly not intentionally. Right. For example, a lot of the work that we're doing in our final internal review of the updated spec is to make sure that we didn't inadvertently change any rules. And that's always a challenge from a spec writing standpoint. Keyscopes, branch filtering, critical for authors, but as I said, it's going to be a challenge for content management, component content management vendors, authoring tool vendors, publishing system vendors. So, be aware for that, plan for it. Try to understand your requirements early, talk to your tool vendors early so that, everybody has ample time to figure out what the right thing to do is and how to do it sooner rather than later. The other thing that I really started to realize about DITA 1.3 is that it really highlights the importance of the information architect role within writing teams. DITA's always had this dichotomy between the responsibility for the maps as the definition of what the publication structures are and the topics, which are the content, right? And you can sort of keep those two domains separate. But when maps were relatively simple in DITA 1.1 and, still relatively simple in DITA 1.2, you had keys, but not everybody was really using keys, you could sort of share those roles across authors and sort of the writing team could be responsible for the maps. With branch filtering and keyscopes, there's really now enough complexity there that unless you're, if you're doing anything at all sophisticated with your content, if your publications are at all sophisticated, you really need one or more people who embody that knowledge, who have that knowledge of really how to do all the complicated stuff with your maps, how to manage your keys and your keyscopes, how to take advantage of the branch filtering, managing your filtering conditions, all that sort of stuff that's largely independent of the content itself. And I think the community has called that role the information architect. And I think it's going to become more important that you identify that role, that you have people who play that role, whether it's their exclusive role or not. That's a function of your team. But it's really important that you recognize that there is this knowledge that somebody has to have on your team, and they have to have ownership of it. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for you to take advantage of these important new features in DITA 1.3. All right, here's a few resources that you can go to for learning more about DITA 1.3, and of course we'll be announcing things as they happen. There's going to be a big panel at the upcoming TCOM conference, and then I think one at the DITA Europe conference. Both of those are in Germany in a couple weeks. And of course, I'm sure it'll be all DITA 1.3 at DITA North America in the spring. And of course, you'll be seeing announcements from the TC as we actually get the spec out for public review and start the final approval process of the specification. All right, so now I think I am ready to take questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Elliot. Definitely a very informative webinar. The first question that's come in is in reference to scoped keys. Are there any best practices for avoiding confusion when, say, the same topic is used in different parts of the same map?
That's a really good question. I mean, to some degree, that's sort of the question of the day, right? Well, anytime you start talking about keys, the most important thing is to have clear naming conventions, right? So have clear naming conventions for your keys, for your key scopes. Make sure that, you know, you've thought through how things should be named, what your organization requirements are within the map, and then make sure that those naming conventions are clearly communicated to authors so that, you know, keys are both predictable. Like if I'm authoring a topic and I say, well, I need to refer to, you know, I need to refer to the installation topic. What's the key for that likely going to be? Or they know where to go to look for that key definition, or, you know, they know who to ask to say, hey, you know, what's the key for this topic that I need to be able to link to? I think that's probably the most detail I can give you at the moment. I mean, one of the things that we're going to be doing from an adoption standpoint is trying to better articulate these best practices. And of course, some of that is going to require having more practical experience with scope keys in general. But really, I have to say, and I always say this, clear naming conventions that have been thought out as well as you have the luxury of thinking them out is really the most important thing.
Excellent. Thank you. At this time, there's no other questions. We'll just give it a couple moments in case any others come in. If you do have any questions, please use the chat function.
I'm trying to think if there's questions that I've been asked in the past. Usually the questions have always been about key scopes. The other thing I would say is if you are going, if you know that you need to use key scopes and branch filtering, you'll want to read those parts of the spec carefully because there's some subtle implications. So for example, if the same topic is used in different key scopes and links to keys that have different bindings in those different key scopes, the processor is now obligated to make separate copies for output purposes of that topic, which is not the way the toolkit works today. So there's some subtle things like that that you'll want to start thinking about if you're in that information architect role, or even if you're an author who's starting to wonder what's it going to mean to refer to keys in different scopes. That's one of the things it can mean. Some of the implications are kind of subtle.
Great. Well, thank you, Elliot. The next question has come in is, are there implications for copy to use in conjunction with branch filtering or scoped keys?
Yes. So if you're using copy to, you're going to, trying to think how to explain this without diving into huge detail. When you're using branch filtering, if you've got multiple DITA val refs from a single topic, then it's going to make copies of those, and you have naming control that gives you the effect of having literally specified copy to. So essentially, you get automatic copy to. If you have specified copy to, the naming rules get applied to the value that you specified on copy to. So, for example, let's say you have my multi-platform example, OS 10, Windows, and so forth. You can say your naming rule is within the Windows branch, append -win to the file name of each reference topic. well, that would get applied even to your copy2 value, right? So if your copy2 is, file1.data, the effective value is going to be file1-win.data after the branch filtering branch copying rules are applied. So I think with that, so the implication there is that you can just use copy2 as you always did. Everything should just work. But you may now be in a position where you don't need to use copy2. Something else that I've been working on, I've actually done some implementation on this already, but also Yarno is thinking about it in terms of the more general Open Toolkit preprocessing, is automatically making copies of topics when they're referenced multiple times. And then I've been working on using key values on topic refs to get you the effect of copy2 without you having to actually specify copy2 separately. So there's going to be more happening in that space, not in terms of the DITA 1.3 spec. It already says what it says, but in terms of what options processors give you for having more control over essentially the result file names or the result addresses of your stuff based on, the details of your map.
All right, great. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. This will conclude today's broadcast. You'll be able to access the recorded version of this webinar starting tomorrow in the archive section of our website, which is www.dclab.com. Our next webinar will be taking place on Tuesday, November 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled "Your Organization May Be Ready for Mobile, but Is Your Content?" And it's being presented by Hal Trent, Senior Consultant of Contact Services. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you.